We'd mentioned that Avraham Avinu was the founding patriarch of the Jewish people due to his level of accomplishment introducing monotheism to mankind, which God was an unknown entity, as the Torah told us when he sent Eliezer initially to locate the future matriarch of the Jewish people, the wife for Yitzchok. He refers to Hashem as a Lokei Hashemayim v'Lokei Oretz. When he adjured Eliezer that he's bound to his instruction, he refers to God as the God of heaven and earth. When Eliezer asks him during their discussion exactly who the person should be, Eliezer says to Avraham, what would be if the young woman should not want to come back? If she would want, should I bring your son there? So Avraham says to Eliezer, his servant, his slave, Elokei Hashemayim, the God of heaven, will send his angel who took me from my father's household, to my birthplace. He will send his angel. So immediately Rashi cites the Midrash, which asks, when he adjures Eliezer, he refers to God as the God of heaven and earth. And when afterwards, when Eliezer asks him the question, he says, the God of heaven who took me from my birthplace, from the household of my father, he will send his angel. But if Avraham already is referring to God as the God of heaven and earth, why does he only refer to Hashem as the God of heaven? That's the question the Midrash asks. So the Midrash answers that when Avraham left Ur Kasdim to go to the promised land, to go to the land that he will show him, God was an unknown entity in the world. God was only the God of heaven. Nobody even knew initially what he was talking about. It was only after Avraham arrived in Canaan and began espousing monotheism, God then became a household word, and he became Elokei Oretz. Not only was the God of heaven, he was the God of earth, of the terrestrial. That was the impact Avraham had on all humanity. What's the objective of creation? That mankind should recognize who the creator is, who the master is. One of the 7 Noahide laws is, even for a non-Jew, he's not permitted to engage or believe in idolatry, to believe that it's the deity who determines existence, but he must believe in God. Even the non-Jew is obligated in monotheism. So therefore, it became a household word that there is a monotheistic being. Not that everybody accepted it, but it was known. It was known. It's like, I'll give you an example. Many years ago, it was unheard of that in the Orient, there was anti-Semitism. Orientals didn't exist. Why? Because the Orientals, years ago, didn't even know Jews existed. They'd never heard there's such a thing as a Jew. Once the world became smaller due to communication, all of a sudden, you have anti-Semites even in the Orient. Because you just have to ruffle the feathers slightly and be aware, not that they have any appreciation what the value of a Jew is. So we say God's existence became a household word. It doesn't mean to say they embraced it. They were pagans. But now it was known that God, at least there is a position that not only is God the God of heaven, but God is even the God of the terrestrial. This was Avram's contribution to existence. So God, in terms of the way he valued Avram, he established him as the founding father, patriarch of the Jewish people. He recreated existence for him. As we said, that was the hay. The significance of adding the hay to his name. He became Avraham. He was able now to father the future patriarch. The miracles that he performed on his behalf when he went to war against the four mightiest kings. It's unheard of. How does one individual take on the four mightiest kings in existence, and ultimately he's the victor? He vanquishes them. The answer is, who is Avraham? Avraham is the purpose of existence. God created existence exactly for Avraham. Because without Avraham, there is no God. God is only a known entity because Avraham is espousing monotheism. Avraham initially was supposed to live 180 years, as Yitzchak was meant to live 180 years, and he did. Yitzchak, the son of Avraham, lived 180 years. Yaakov Avinu, the most special of the patriarchs, was meant to live 180 years. He lived 147 years. He had 33 years deducted from his life, which we'll discuss in the future. But initially, he was meant to live 180 years, Yaakov. Each one of the patriarchs was meant to live 180 years. Avram only lived 175 years. God took 5 years off Avram's life. Why? Because Avram was told by God, you will live and you will pass away b'seva tova, a good, ripe old age. Meaning when you pass away, you'll be in a state where you will feel that you have everything. You will given everything. Fully content in every sense of the word. So the Midrash tells us, we find in last week's reading, when Avram passed away, who buried him? The Torah tells us, Yitzchak and Yishmael. Yitzchak initially and Yishmael, they were at odds. Yitzchak representing the spiritual, the good. Ishmael representing the evil. He was a man who was a bandit. He victimized humanity. His mother was an Egyptian princess. But when Avram passes away, Torah goes out of its way to say that Yitzchak and Yishmael buried Avram. When Yitzchak passes away, the Torah tells us that Esav and Yaakov buried Yitzchak, their father. When it comes to Avram, Yitzchak is mentioned before Yishmael. Yishmael accorded Yitzchak the respect, although he was younger. He was 14 years younger than his brother, Yishmael. He accorded him respect. He went first. Because Yishmael, that was an indication, Yishmael at the end of his life, did tshuva. He repented. Meaning Yishmael repented before Avram passed away. So Avram, when he left this world, he left in a good mindset, understanding that even his son Yishmael, who initially went off, and he was told by God to drive him out of the house with his mother, ultimately he came back. That's the Seva Tova. He died in a good old age. Esav personified evil. Second. Norman, you have to mute your computer. Okay. So it says the day Avram passed away, Asa violated 5 cardinal sins: idolatry, adultery, thievery, blasphemy, the most extreme level of transgression. If Avram would have been aware of this, it would have been contrary to Seva Tova, understanding what kind of grandson he had. Avram was never aware what happened to Esav. Never. God withheld it from him, never knew. But the only way he was able to withhold it from Avram is Avram had to have 5 years taken off his life. 5 years. Could you know what it means? Avram living another 5 years what would have it meant to humanity in terms of his effect, his influence, his dissemination of monotheism. It would have made a worlds of a difference, but not to cause Avram the pain. Esav going off the beaten path, appropriate path, becoming what he became, to withhold this information from Avram that he should be able to die in this good, content, old state. It was worthwhile to take 5 years off Avram's life. God owed it to him. He owed it to him. Because who gave meaning to existence? Who allowed existence even to have a chance to address the objective of existence, which is for God's glory? It was Avram. Therefore, God gave him that promise. Although the promise cost him 5 years of his life, it was worthwhile for God to give him to take those 5 years that Avram should die in this good old state, not to be aware how his grandson went off. This is Avram. You could say, God, knowing that Esav is going off the beaten track, abandoning everything about God, turning his back on God, what God could have done, don't offer him the initial promise. You will die b'seva tova. You will die a good old age. If he wouldn't have said that, he would have lived his full life. Evidently, God understood, because of who Avram was, not to give him that guarantee. It would be actually shortchanging him, leaving this world in a state of pain and anguish, understanding that due to his bringing a child into existence, this is his progeny. Now it's interesting. When Avram went into the kiln, why did he come out of the kiln? A man gives his life to God, which is the ultimate mitzvah. He will have an exceptional level in the world to come. With God, he came out of the kiln. Why did he come out of the kiln? So the Midrash quotes a verse from prophets. He came out of the kiln because his grandson Yaakov had redeemed him from the kiln. What does it mean he was redeemed him? Because Yaakov had to be born. And if Avram would have perished then, before he fathered Yitzchak, which is the timeline of the Ur Kasdim being thrown into the kiln, there would have never been a Yaakov. If there would have been a Yaakov, there would have never been the Jewish people. So, because since there had to be a Jewish people, God had to perform the miracle on behalf of Avram that when he went to the kiln, he came out alive. Because if he wouldn't have come out alive, there wouldn't have been a Yitzchak, and if there wouldn't have been a Yitzchak, there would have been a Yaakov. So therefore, the prophet says, why did Avram come out of the kiln? He was redeemed by Yaakov. Yaakov, our patriarch, redeemed him from the kiln. When God took him out of the kiln, saved him, the angels in heaven said to Avram, said to God, God, how do you save this man from the kiln? Do you realize what kind of grandson he's going to have? He's going to have a grandson, Esav. That's what's going to descend from him. The man personifies evil. What he represents is everything contrary to what you were all about. That he should perish in the kiln. That's what the angel said to God. For your sake, for your glory, let him perish. He perishes, he'll never be an Esav. God says it's not a problem. Because there's going to be a Yaakov. And Yaakov will have the wherewithal to counter the negative influence, the evil of Esav. Therefore, it's worthwhile to redeem Avram from the kiln, although one of his descendants will be Esav, as evil as it may be, because there will be a descendant, Yaakov, who's the counterbalance to Esav, and he'll be able to counter him, and ultimately, he will destroy Esav. Coming Mashiach, Edom will be destroyed. There won't be a trace of evil in this world. And as a result of that, there will not be an Esau. There will not be an Edom. So therefore, it's worthwhile to take out Avraham from the kiln, although there's going to be endless suffering due to Esau. As it says, if the voice is not the voice of Yaakov, we're going to be subject to the hands of Esau, to Amalek, and to the Edomites. The destruction of the temple, the second temple, was done by the Romans, who are the descendants of Esau. They're the Edomites. Doesn't make a difference. But since ultimately, what's going to be, the Edomites will be vanquished, will be destroyed, and all evil will be, and God's glory will only come through the progeny of Avraham, which is Yaakov. It's worthwhile. But if there was nothing to counter the evil, Avraham would have never come out of that kiln. This is who Avraham is. That means Avraham, within his DNA, had the ability, of course, it's part of God's plan, to transmit that special spiritual pedigree to Yitzchak to pass on to Yaakov. Because Yaakov, all his children, all 12 sons, were the 12 tribes of Israel, which are known as Shiftei Koch. They're the tribes of God. They represent God. We are called Bnei Yisrael. We're the sons of Israel. We're not called the sons of Jacob. Sons of Jacob are only, that's biological. Sons of Israel, Bnei Yisrael means, why did Yaakov have the upgrade from Yaakov to Yisrael? Because after he had fought with the angel, and it's unheard of, how does a mortal defeat a spiritual angel? That only confirms that Yaakov wasn't an ordinary mortal. He was able to convert his physicality to take on a spiritual persona that was even more powerful, and he was able to be victorious over an angel. That's why he was named Yisrael. You lorded over man and God, and you succeeded. Therefore, we are Yisrael. We are that people. We have that ability to have the upper hand over, regardless of what the odds are. Is it just coincidental that the Jewish people, relative to humanity, are literally at an infinitesimal number? You have 8 billion people in existence. How many Jews are there? 13 million, 15 million. It's not to be believed. We're less than a speck on the spectrum of humanity. And why? Because number is irrelevant. Because the Jewish people, to prove and confirm this, that our essence and our core is spiritual, how do we exist? There's no nation in the history of this existence has been through what the Jewish people have been through. The destruction, first and second temple, Beitar, upheavals, displacements, pogroms, Holocausts, and we're still on the top of the mountain. All the nations that tried to destroy us went into the dustbins of history, and we're here. How's that possible? One answer: we're not a physical people. We're physical human beings, but our dimension of value is not physical. We represent God. We are Bnei Yisrael. That's what we're, the eternal people. But when are we treated as Bnei Yisrael? Only if we conform to the will of God. Whenever we turn our backs on God, we get the brunt of justice. And then we come back. And God promised us the Jews will never, ever become extinct. There'll always be a core left. And it always regenerates itself. It's interesting. There are always models in nature which reflect the reality of the Jewish people. It's known that forests, whenever there's a forest fire, the value of a fire is always like they regentrify the forest. And it creates a rejuvenation of nature. And the forest comes back even stronger, healthier than it was before. Whenever we turn our backs on God, God releases or withdraws, and we feel a very negative energy. And we're nearly destroyed. And then there's a tremendous upsurge when we start coming back. I'll give you an example. The most recent upsurge, we had a Holocaust. The Nazis, 6 million Jews were murdered, butchered, annihilated in the most demonic, monstrous way. A level of hate which humanity hasn't seen in many years, hundreds of years. Systematic annihilation. What happens after the Holocaust? Relatively speaking, a handful of survivors. After the war, they come back. If they were married, their spouses, their families were killed. They remarry. The young remarry. There's a new nation born. The Torah scholars of Europe, many of them survived. Each of them started various Torah institutions, which produced exceptional Torah scholars. Today, Torah is thriving in the world. The numbers of people engaged in Torah study hasn't been like this going back 2,000 years. There's a gentrification. So the physical, the forest, when it burns down, it regenerates to come back stronger. Whenever the physicality tries to destroy the spirituality, there's a resurgence coming back stronger than ever. Avraham Avinu never waned. He was always, he's referred to as the Ivri, Avraham HaIvri. It's translated as Hebrew, but it's an incorrect translation. Ivri, the Midrash tells us from the word of Aver. Hum Aver Echad v'olam Aver Hasheni. He's on one side and the world's on the other side. He took on the world single-handedly to change the world. He was the monotheist. The whole world is pagans. To him was irrelevant. I will take on the world single-handedly, knowing that God is his backer. And number means nothing. It's God's world, as they say. Not as they say, as it is. It's God's world. And if Avraham never waned, he was always the Ivri. He was always fighting God's battle. And there was no battle that he ever lost. Because he was always lived in the context of the spiritual persona. Never succumbed to physical temptation. And he did things which were almost not imaginable. The Akedah, that level of selfless negation to God, to take a son that's most beloved to him, born to him at the age of 100, and bring him as a sacrifice at the age of 37, with zeal. And only he didn't slaughter him because God said, withdraw your hand from the land. It's unheard of. There's nothing that could deter Avraham, nothing. And therefore, because there was nothing that could deter him, and he was always attached to that level to God, God was always with him. And God always empowered him. And he was empowered. To what degree was Avraham opposed by humanity? The Maharal of Prague explains, Maharal of Prague explains very often numbers, the significance of numbers. We find that after the 5 kings were beaten by the 4 kings, they were the mightiest powers in existence. The 4 kings took Lot, the nephew of Avraham, captive, because they wanted to bait Avraham and draw him into battle and have him killed, because they never believed. They knew he was a person who was a fanatic. He was irrational the way they understood his behavior, and he will go after the captives of his nephew and go to battle against them. They will destroy Avraham. So the 4 kings, they took Lot with his family captives. Avraham was committed to his nephew. He went to save him. And lo and behold, Avraham is the victor. He defeated the 4 kings. So the Rav Prak says, why were there 4? Is that just coincidental? There were 4 kings. He says, if a person is surrounded on 3 sides, you have the 4th side to escape. Number 4 represents total opposition. You're totally opposed. The 4 kings, they took Lot captive because Avram's existence was not tolerable by humanity. That's the significance. Number 4. It represents total opposition. Nobody was there to back Avram. No one. They were the victors. You know, it's interesting. In the United States, when the Eastern European Jews came to America, many of them initially were observant. There's no Jewish education. Many of them, at best, retained traditional Judaism. Many of them assimilated. But who was the voice of the Jewish people in the United States of America? The Reform Jews. The German Jews, who were very wealthy, they were the voice of Jewry in America. At the time of World War II, when Roosevelt was president of the United States, and even to the early 50s, who was the voice of Jewry in America? The Reform and Conservative movement. The Orthodox had no voice whatsoever. We were literally swept under the carpet. They threw us crumbs. They tolerated us because they believed that Orthodox Judaism, it's just a question of time before it disappears. With America, the United States advancing financially, technologically, in that direction, eventually this extreme position, archaic position of Judaism will come to an end. Little did they know that it was to the contrary. We read in the Talmud, in the Gemara, if you look at the Hebrew alphabet, the word emes, Aleph, Mem, Tov, which means truth, the shape of the letters, each letter has legs to it. It stands on 2. Aleph has 2 legs. Mem has a base. Tov has 2 letters. That's emes. Sheker, which means falsehood, shin is a point, comes to a point, 1 leg. Kuf has 1 leg. Reish has 1 leg. That's sheker. Sheker means falsehood. So the Talmud tells us, emes yesh lo raglayim, truth has feet. Truth has substance. Truth prevails. Falsehood, it's temporary. It's just a question of time before it goes to the wayside. It has a very weak base. It looks like truth will ultimately be removed, will go into the background and disappear. No, just to the contrary. Emes yesh lo raglaim. Emes has feet. It has a base to it. There's a basis. Therefore, it prevails. Torah is emes. Orthodox Jewry, its value, its belief, everything's rooted in the divine. That's where it begins. That's where it ends. The others, at best, the written law is divine. The oral law is not divine. Or Reform Nothing's divine. Whatever it is, that's sheker. So what they believe sheker will prevail, it's going into the wastebin, into the wastebasket, into the dustbins. The truth is thriving. The truth is expanding. 4 mighty kings, totally opposed to Avraham. As I said, the number 4 signifies total opposition. But little did they know that Avraham represents God, which is emes, which is truth. Emes yesh lo raglayim. He is the fortification who deflects all attacks. And therefore he was the victor, and he was able to return Lot from captivity, and he was declared by the world to be the Prince of God. Many years ago, I'm going back 38 years ago. I'm not going to mention the name. Somebody came from England, and his family had come to England in Cromwell's time. His family was originally Sephardic Jews, totally assimilated. You know what it means going back that far? And every generation, Jew married a Jew. This person, he born a genius. His parents sent him to Cambridge. He was the head of the debating team into Cambridge, and it was known that the person who was promised to be Prime Minister of England, every one of them was the head of the debating team of Cambridge. Guess what happens? The parents allow their son at the age of 19 to visit Israel. Goes to Israel, he's touched Jewishly. And he has an interest in pursuing his Jewish roots. And this is while he was in Cambridge. This was all percolating in his mind. And he decided to become an observant Jew. Not only become an observant Jew, and he already was working, he was a senior vice president at one of the leading banks. He tells his parents at the age of 26, he's taking off a year or two, he's going to Israel to study. Yeah, his parents are losing their minds. Here, his parents, they barely believe in anything. All they know, the Jewish, they have a special relationship with the Queen, with all the upper echelons of government in England, and the son is going off the cliff. And they realize it's not a phase. And ultimately, he became a Talmid Chacham, married an observant girl, raised a family. He has a major financial fund in London all these years, succeeded tremendously financially. What's the chance, the likelihood, of family remaining Jewish from the 1600s until 1985? That they don't assimilate. And not only did he become a Baal Tshuva, he had 2 sisters who became observant. You understand what this is? How's it possible? How's it possible? It's against all odds. When we deal with Judaism, there's no such thing as statistics. Unfortunately, we have losses, we have casualties, but if you have some merit in the background, a forefather, God will not abandon you. God reignites that spark. That tiny spark becomes a conflagration, literally, all-consuming. And it's able to stand up against all odds and succeed on many levels. This is all part of Avraham Ivri, Hu me'ever echad, v'olam she'ever hasheni. He takes on the world single-handedly. When God's there, there are no questions. You merit a level of energy, power, that regardless of what your situation is, if God wants you to succeed, He will give you every opportunity to make the choice to be able to succeed and be who you want to be, only due to the merit that exists within your DNA.